Hey, welcome back to another episode of Drop Your Noise. If you're new to the show, my name is Kirti, the host of the show. Now, let me just tell you something. Nothing annoys me more than when we assume what people are like and what they are going through, especially individuals who have a multi-ethnic identity, like me. It can get frustrating. Now, sometimes we don't quite fit in that cultural intelligence standard narrative. And surprisingly, what many people don't know is that we're often conflicted inside. Such complexities can leave us wondering what decisions to make sometimes, especially when it comes around our identity and our family and our profession. And in this week's episode, I sat down with Eden. Eden works actively with the ESEA community. I know it's an acronym. It stands for East Southeast Asian Community, and she helps them with their well-being. So together we unpack the layers of this cultural identity and the power of storytelling to help us understand each other beyond the surface. Enjoy this week's episode. Okay, what do we need to drop our noise about when it comes to multi-ethnicity and storytelling? Why is it important?
I think we need to drop our noise about or around judgment. I think a lot to do with identity is really complex. I think our identities intersect in so many places. And so I really feel we need to drop that noise around assumption, around judgment, around stereotyping, because especially with the work that I do around East and Southeast Asian communities with EVR, I've realized that even this new label of East and Southeast Asian it's only kind of 5 years old or so, but there's so much diversity within this community, and no two people look or sound the same or have the same experiences. And so when it comes to like the kind of multicultural society that we now live in, and when it comes to people, I think we just need to drop the noise around judgment and assuming that we know what other people's lives might be like, what other people's thoughts, opinions, beliefs might be, what their experiences might have been, just because they might share some aspect of identity with us.
So what got you to this point? You said, interesting, you said that it's a new terminology. I'm surprised you just said that. I was like, oh, I would have always thought it was Southeast Asian. Maybe I'm Asian but I'm not Asian because there's so many layers to that.
There are so many layers.
So why is it a new term?
So East Asian and Southeast Asian themselves aren't new terms for sure, but the term ESEA is definitely a new term. And it started around 2020, around the time of the pandemic, which was a really, really difficult time for a lot of EC communities because of the rise in anti-EC hate, anti-Asian hate kind of globally. And in the UK context, the term Asian colloquially has always kind of referred to South Asians, which is kind of converse to how it's used in the US, where it tends to be in reference to East Asians, maybe East and Southeast Asians. And so in the UK, when you don't have that kind of label to identify yourself, you can kind of become invisible, right? So it became really important that our communities had a label. And so a bunch of organizations came together, a major one being BC, and so the British East and Southeast Asian Network, which is, as far as I know, the biggest EC collective in the UK, but also EVR, which is one of the main organizations involved in coining the term. And they came up with the term EC, ESEA. And there are different variations of this, like SEA, SEEA, but EC or ESEA is the most common one that I see used.
There's so many.
There are so many, again, because identity is kind of undefinable, right? And naturally so expansive. So that's why people use all kinds of different terms. But yeah, that's why EC is kind of a new term as of the past 5 years or so. And we're still kind of trying to understand what that means, how people relate to it, if people identify with it at all, and what it means to be someone who's EC.
And so what does that mean for you? Because I share with everybody your cultural tapestry or your heritage. I always like to think of it as a tapestry.
So I'm from a Chinese Malaysian family and background, but I was born and raised in the UK, kind of near London. If you aren't looking at the video, I probably just sound like someone who's born and bred Brit. Well, I am born and bred British, but born and bred British, like white British, right? But growing up, having that invisible string I was just saying earlier, tying me back to my quote unquote home country, my quote unquote motherland, has always been a really important aspect of my identity for me. So yeah, Chinese, Malaysian, British, I kind of hover between a lot of different worlds. And that it's kind of sent me on my own journey of growth and understanding over the past 22 years, 23 years that I've been here now.
And with that, also, there's another layer because I always find in the West, people don't realize this, how deep this goes, but there's also generational importance in our Asian roots. I think from stemming from Middle East on going more towards the East, our roots are very tied with generations, our elders, and how much influence they play on our lives. And then growing up with the West, you have both the individualistic world and you have this um, Asian Asian tapestry as well. So how did you navigate that growing up?
hmm I think for me, the way that I would summarize the conflict or the meeting point of these two halves of my identity is this negotiation between, as you kind of said, the individual and the collective. And I was recently talking to one of our therapists actually at EVR, and she was talking about how there is no individual without the collective, and there's no collective without the individual.
Okay.
And so when it comes to, yeah, kind of when it comes to this meeting point, for me, it's always been a bit of a struggle of trying to understand, especially, growing up and belonging in many ways to a different culture than my parents do and the older generations of my family do. It's kind of navigating how I can pursue the life that I want to and the growth that I want to, while also,
Mhm.
because it's something that I want personally as well, staying connected to my own culture. And a lot of that has been helped by storytelling and about inheriting the stories of my people and my country, my culture, my food. And so for me, yeah, those halves of my identity have really come together in that struggle to be the individual and be the collective, because I really do believe that you need both and you need to pursue things through both of those channels to be wholly kind of satisfied,
Mhm.
um, for sure.
But most of this, so your heritage also has really driven your career because you are an avid storyteller. You, when I met you, the importance of storytelling really stood out. And I was thinking about it because this month I was thinking about, the importance of stories, the importance of legacies. Why is it going forward? Is it going to be more important than ever that these stories are still somewhat preserved, even though I know you kind of dropped the word conflict in between there, like, and then leaped out of it. But I don't know if you had this, but I found myself in a lot of this feelings of conflict, like where do I choose and how do I choose, and yeah, negotiating. But actually, what am I compromising here? Which belief do I compromise here for this, for what I want? And then if what I want feels so selfish. So you've done a lot of this storytelling and the importance of heritage moving forward as well. How does storytelling has helped you? Because I know ESEA came during the COVID period, right? What happened during
Mhm.
COVID, but not many people, listeners, actually know what happened. So take me to that point back and where you got deeper and deeper into the storytelling and the importance
Mhm.
of it.
Mhm. So the pandemic was a difficult time for everyone, right, across the board in various degrees. But the reason that this kind of EC movement, this ESEA movement started up is because of the way that this in the media, in America, especially with politicians, the way that this was pinned on China. And then very quickly that spiraled into racism, into hate with a capital H. It spiraled into violence,
Mm-hmm.
discrimination. It spiraled into attacks on public transport, um, shootings, right? Targeting East and Southeast Asian communities, not only in the US, but in the UK too. We saw it here in the UK, and it was terrifying. And so that's why this specific movement for East and Southeast Asian rights and recognition came about, because I found that even though there are lots of ways in which we've come leaps and bounds when it comes to anti-racist discourse and movements, there's still a lot of ways in which, especially kind of 5 years ago now, the Asian communities have always been ignored. They're always the butt of the joke. They're always, oh, the racism against them isn't really real. It's mostly just microaggressions. No one's dying over that. People are dying, but no one's dying over that. And so we don't need to pay that any attention. Let's pay more attention towards these other minoritized communities that I would never deny are also facing severe hate and racism and being murdered and treated with violence on the streets as well, of course. And there's a history there as well, and a storytelling there as well. But that's not to say that East and Southeast Asian communities haven't, one, always been here, and therefore, two, always been subject to hate and subjugation. And so
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic was a really important jumping point, or a really important catalyst, I would say, for driving non-East and Southeast Asian friends and allies to realize that, oh, okay, so this hate and discrimination against East and Southeast Asians is real. It is serious. People are dying over it.
Mm-hmm.
These microaggressions aren't funny. These people shouldn't be the butt of the joke. And that's when we started to be taken seriously, I feel. And that's when I really came into, I would say I only really entered the scene maybe in the past 2 years. But I can save those stories in a moment. Do you have any thoughts about any of that?
I think in that moment of COVID, so I'm going back to the COVID times, right? And ignorance in a bedroom, silence in a bedroom. So I remember when you say 2020, all I think about was my life in four walls. That's it. So to
Mm-hmm.
some degree, yes, you kind of knew what was going on in the world, but because you were in four walls, you didn't feel the impact of it. Like, okay, yes, you felt the one of George Floyd and that was really at an height, but the one of the hate towards the Chinese race actually never really sunk in till I met you. Well, you and
Hmm.
Eileen, and we had this having this conversation. So I'm thinking back on that. And then the one thing that pops in my mind is that I don't know if you have it in Far East Asia. Maybe I've heard that from clients that they tend not to like to speak about what's going on. In the South Asian community, I always got raised with the idea of like, don't tell people what's going on. You had to be silent because our families never wanted anybody to know our struggles and our pain. So there's a shame that's very tied in with our mental well-being. So
Mm.
when you're talking now that, it's microaggressive, I'm like, if it, if we were louder, would that have made a difference
Mm.
as a
I think
culture?
that's definitely a component to the current culture, like the social culture we have around understanding Asian, I will say in general, because I agree, I think this is across Asia, um, understanding hate and how serious we treat hate towards our communities. It's interesting. I think shame is a really big thing here, right? And guilt. And I think something that's been really drilled into me and my peers, my Asian peers, is that to talk about things that you're struggling with, bad things that have happened to you, is to burden your family, burden your community, and that is inherently a bad thing. There's this incredible quote I read recently, which I might have to paraphrase, but it's something like, inconvenience is the price you pay for community. Loneliness is the price you pay.
For convenience?
Convenience. There you go. Essentially, it's not to burden those around you, the ones who love you, is not inherently a bad thing. Why is burden phrased as this bad thing, right? I carry your weight because I love you. I carry your weight because I want to lift the weight off your shoulders, right? I want to ease your load. And that is love, right? Inconvenience is love. Love is inconvenience. Of course, there are boundaries, there are nuances there, but inherently, you cannot be in community. You cannot be in a village and be a villager without being inconvenienced, because that's what it means to lean on others and allow others to lean on you. And so, this shame and the stigma we have around speaking about mental health, about mental struggles, about racism, about discrimination, about violence against our communities, I think has definitely contributed to the culture that we have now. But all of that to say that, the reason we have this shame and this stigma, this hasn't come internally from our own communities, or maybe it has in part, but it's also because of, the capital T trauma that we all hold in our
Yeah.
bodies. That means that we have bigger problems, right? Our parents are there trying to get food on the table. Why are you there being silly and anxious or silly and depressed, quote unquote, right? Like we have
Yeah.
bigger issues. We have had bigger issues. If we've been on boats traveling across the water trying to get to safety, why are you here talking about microaggressions? Because someone called you the C word, right? And, there are again nuances here, but I can understand where the shame and the stigma comes from. But that's one thing I always like to say is that to burden other people, like I want to be burdened by you, right? If I care about you, I want to carry your burden. I want to ease your load. And that's not a bad thing. It's
But
a
then
privilege.
I get that's the privilege, but I also think, doesn't that privilege sometimes carry some sort of the guilt? Let me explain it, where my train of thought is. You are from, so I'm supposedly Generation X. Let's put it this way, right? Different generations undergo different challenges because each generation moves the needle a little bit forward, and then you're faced with other challenges, right? So then
Mm-hmm.
in the family or in the mental state of mind of community, when we lean into the community as well, a lot of the generation that's younger, that's more vocal, which to me, I feel it's great. Still get also a lot of like you're opening your mouth too much or you're saying, you get the backlash as well. So you're now in like, well, I'm leaning into my community, but yet when I lean in, I'm feeling guiltified by it. But have you had
Hmm.
that? Because I've seen that in the South Asian community. I'm not sure if that's in the Far East.
Yeah. I think there is that kind of, and this is where I come back to the conflict or the meeting point between my cultures, I think, because I think naturally, I think also growing up in a more individualistic or outspoken or overt Western culture compared to the culture back home, I've kind of been born and raised, in the communities I have been here in the UK to, speak my mind. And that's not without growth and learning how to speak my mind and defend myself and stand up for myself. But that also that then meets my home culture, that meets my Chinese Malaysian identity, where I carry in my body this reluctance to make a fuss,
Mhm.
to stir the pot, right? To stand up and make noise, right? Just because, we've got bigger issues, and there have been more serious things to talk about. There's no reason to bring this up or cause drama or to raise an issue where there isn't really one, because look how lucky and privileged you are to, and this is my internal voice, I've not been told this by my parents or anything. Look how lucky you are to just be, have a roof over your head and have food on the table and have a job that you love and have friends and a community that loves you. Like, how could you not be happy? So I think there's definitely that hesitation for me that I'm always coming up against, that constant discomfort of, oh, should I be speaking on this? I work for a mental health service provider and I'm Asian. How unheard of is this, right? This is my full-time role. And every time I'm kind of talking about this with my family and I'm getting my parents involved in our social media campaigns and things, it's a little bit unbelievable every time. But that's how I know we're kind of, making progress and moving forward. But that's not to say that I don't, yes, regularly feel that discomfort of, ooh, this feels like uncharted territory because my people don't talk about this, my people don't do this, and yet here I am doing it.
I like that word, uncharted territory. So before we started recording, you said, Kirtines, drop your noise. And then you really took me by surprise and you go, but also we have to embrace the noise. And I went, I didn't think of it that way. So uncharted territory, that's the moment you're kind of embracing the noise, I would say, right? What does
Hmm.
that mean for you? Like you get your parents on board into these campaigns and then you're going through the processing inside.
Hmm.
So how do you go through that? And what do you get out of, and how do you, well, the thing is, what is the key realizations you get out of it, from these moments?
Hmm. I think there's so many ways to interpret, and this is why I think it's such a great name for your podcast. But there are so many ways to interpret drop your noise, right? But I think at this moment in time, what I'm taking from that is that noise means all the voices, right? All the internal voices, all the external voices, all the expectations, all the internal expectations to everything I want to live up to, everything everyone else wants me to live up to.
Oh,
That's the noise for me. And
okay.
so it's a lot of noise. It's constantly happening. And so sometimes it's necessary to drop the noise. If I want to get anything done, if I want to stay sane, I have to drop the noise and just follow, my heart. But at the same time, there are other times where I really want to embrace the noise, right? I want to hear the outside opinions. I want to listen to what I intuitively want all at the same time. And so as I'm kind of in this uncharted territory, I feel simultaneously or maybe more so, I am embracing the noise rather than dropping it because
How do
I'm
you
headed in
embrace
a
it?
direction. I'm headed in a direction where no one that I know has headed before. And so if I'm not embracing the noise and welcoming the change and hearing the outside opinions and taking all of it on at once, I don't feel that I can continue to make that progress. I think for me, dropping the noise means staying in my comfort zone. And more every day, I'm realizing that's not what I need to be doing. It's nice to be comfortable, but you don't grow in comfort, right? So
Never.
more and more, I feel I'm actually embracing the noise.
And I find it interesting because for me, I see a difference on this one, which is super interesting.
Hmm.
So I feel sometimes I get too much of the noise that after a while I need to drop all of it and then go through it. Actually, I think my next podcast should be called Edit the Noise, really. Because
Yeah.
um I find it interesting. You say you take all of the advice, but don't you get overwhelmed? Don't you at some point ever get confused?
Yes, I think so. And maybe that's why it has to be a bouncing back and forth, right, between dropping the noise and embracing the noise. But I think it's valuable, right, to have all of those outside opinions and to be in tune with what's going on around you, what others are thinking, what others are doing. And that can be overwhelming, but I always feel quite grounded in what I'm doing while I am observing all of that outside noise because I know I'm confident and I feel secure in my current path and my journey. And I'm open to outside influences and opinions and people pulling me in other directions, testing other waters, other territories. But I feel so secure and confident in myself, who I am, my values, what I'm doing right now. I believe in it so much
Hmm.
that I don't feel I can be derailed by the outside noise. And so I'm always happy to embrace it. I don't feel that I constantly need to be in this comfort zone where I'm blocking out all of the noise, which for me currently is how I'm interpreting drop the noise. But I see how that's quite an extreme understanding and interpretation. And I see how
Wow.
dropping the noise is really valuable as well.
I think it comes with many layers when that those three words. I was thinking back while you were just talking about embracing it also, but then how did you embrace moments? Because I've had this at least. When people look at you and they've automatically labeled, like when I'm here and people automatically label me as Indian. So they'll start talking Hindi. And I'm like, I'm more comfortable in Dutch, and then they're like, oh.
Hmm.
So, and then sometimes, you hear the little comments that come, and those are those expectations you were talking about. They come in these little phrases and you're like, ooh, that didn't feel okay, or that didn't feel all right. Have you ever had moments like that when other people's noise has really made you feel like on the on the like borderline not good, but you don't know how to, and you had to rephrase it for them. Have you ever had those moments?
I think in doing this work with EC communities in the UK, and as someone who is young, as someone who's second generation, I am very frequently coming up against those situations where my identity is being misinterpreted or undermined or misunderstood. I think especially being second generation, sounding the way I do, having been acculturated in this society, in this environment, rather than back home in Malaysia or in China or anywhere like that. Yeah, I'm constantly coming up against these moments of discomfort and these moments of, oh, I feel I'm being unfairly judged, unfairly evaluated. And I mentioned that specifically around being second generation because I think something that's quite inherent to Asian communities is, of course, respect for your elders, which is necessary. Um, and respect for tradition, I think, is maybe more so what I mean for tradition, and for authenticity, which, and none of these are bad things, but I think with that comes a kind of rejection of young people, young adults, their ideas and potential change. There's a kind
Mhm.
of resistance to all of that. And so I find myself in these spaces working with community members who might be older than myself or might just be first generation, but same age as me. And I feel that there's this like insurmountable gap between us because there's just this whole like canyon of difference in our experiences.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel I'm being judged because I, for example, can't speak Mandarin fluently, or I don't speak Hokkien fluently. I can't speak anything apart from English fluently. And that's an internal kind of struggle I feel I'm constantly
Yeah.
up against as well, is like that difficulty of not being able to speak in your what's meant to be your mother tongue. I think is a really difficult reality. And of course that can change, right? I can learn my language. I'm in the progress of doing that. It's difficult, but I'm doing it. But when I already have sometimes that internal insecurity around, ooh, like, can I claim this Chinese Malaysian identity? Am I really Chinese Malaysian if I can't even speak my own language? If I don't even live there? If I wasn't even born there? If when you have that internal messaging and then you
Yeah.
receive that external signaling of like, ooh, you're different from me, you're other, even from your own, from, we're in the same community when you're the other,
That's the
right?
word.
You're
The
different
other.
because you're
Yeah.
new or you're young or you weren't born where you were quote unquote meant to be born, or you don't speak the language you're quote unquote meant to speak. You sound so different. You look so different. The way you dress, act, interact with others is so different. And so definitely I feel that judgment, that discomfort, I'm regularly in those situations because of the work that I'm in, because of the identity that I hold.
I think you've hit the nail on the head about the word the other. Because the othering, I
Hmm.
forgot about that. But that's so true because I remember back in college, I had somebody tell me, "You're not Indian enough." And I was
Enough.
raised at home thinking I was Indian enough. And so when you leave your parents' house and all of a sudden, and true enough, I didn't speak my languages. I understood bits and words because they would speak, and those are the words they pick up in the house. But it's that uttering that would get to
Hmm.
me a lot. And it took me a while to realize also that we're in a massive advantage being in the second culture, or, being the first raised in a different culture as well. So what I wanted to know is you do a lot working with different generations as well. You work with well-being, and tell me about the storytelling because you're very passionate about storytelling as well. Why?
Hmm.
How does it all tie in?
I would say that my journey with storytelling started before EVR. So before the kind of recent years of my life, now in full-time work. It started back in university with an internship that I did at a museum in Bristol here in the UK. Um, you can imagine, and this is back when I thought that I wanted to work in heritage and museums and galleries. And, maybe I might still make that segue. I don't think I will, but the future is open. I'm open to the noise.
Exactly.
Um, but that's where my journey started, right? In work. And it was at this internship. And in a museum space, storytelling is, the captions that are next to the paintings and the artifacts. It's in the feeling that is evoked when you walk into a room and I always felt that when I was walking to heritage spaces, museums and galleries, that I could just feel the weight of the history around me. These buildings are so old, they carry so much history. And while I was younger, that was a really positive and amazing feeling for me because it just felt so great to be in a place in these four walls that carried such great historical significance. And that just felt so epic, like truly in the word, like epic.
Yeah.
And then as I grew up, there's kind of that increasing sense of like disillusionment with those kinds of spaces because you learn about colonialism, you learn about why museums even started, which is based off of theft, the theft of rich, white, elitist men. And that's a history that they're never going to be able to erase, right? That's the thing with history. You can't change it. Those are the roots that the museum sector has and museum spaces have. You look at the archives, you look at the like huge the plethora of items, the hoards, I will say the hoards of items that they keep and that just collect dust because they just have so much stolen stuff from communities all over the world, probably
Wow.
from communities, from our own communities, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's very
and you grow
confronting.
up, you learn all of that, and I just grew increasingly concerned with these kinds of spaces. And then I did that internship, and I learned so much more about storytelling and how important it is that the language we use is correctly reflecting the story we're trying to communicate. There is one painting in that museum painted by George Stubbs. It was commissioned by a plantation owner to commemorate his dog and his favorite horse or something. It's a story around how it's called The Horse and Dog Trim, and it commemorates what he interprets as this episode where his dog saved his life because one of his enslaved people were coming into his house at night with a knife trying to murder him.
Okay.
And then the dog barked and woke him up. And the story that you attach to that painting, the caption you choose, the story you choose to tell matters so much because that could be a real educational caption, right? We could be saying, oh, here is the story. This is why it was commissioned. Here is why that is inherently problematic. Here is why an enslaved person might want to kill their quote unquote master. Here are the conditions that allowed a horrific thing like slavery to exist all over the world. Here is how it was abolished. Here's where we are now. Here is how this legacy still exists to this day. That is the story that should have been told next to that painting, and it wasn't. It was a very matter of fact. This was commissioned because an enslaved person tried to kill his master. So the master was woken up by his dog, and then he commissioned this painting to say thank you to his dog. And then he threw in his favorite horse because that was a tradition at the time to paint your favorite horses. And so that painting is a horse and it's a dog. And that caption, that inherently reductive and simplified caption, that is what we took issue with during that internship. And so this is where my interest in storytelling began because as an English graduate as well, and as someone who as a child was a voracious reader and is now trying her absolute best to get back into
Mhm.
it, I believe more than anything that words carry so much power. What
Yeah.
we say, how we write, the way we choose to communicate has so much power. And the stories we choose to tell with the language that we choose has so much power. Um, because that's all we have, right? As we're moving forward, as we are exponentially moving into this age of technology, social media, AI, as we're moving further and further away and faster away from everything that we've known before, our history, even where we are now, it matters so much that we are preserving our history, understanding our legacies, and archiving, right? Like remembering, preserving where we are now, who we were, and these stories from our past, our collective past and our individual past.
Well, I think more than that, what you're really alluding to the is that you can have the stories, you can have the archives, but if they're written very caption, this, but you don't really know what else is into the story, and let's say future AI will pick it up, it's going to pick up what it is going to interpret it as, because
Mm.
generative AI does not necessarily produce to you the right results. It still hallucinates. And so,
Exactly. Yeah.
and there's also the no noise, right? You have the no backstory, no nothing. So that someday, while we're all dependent on computer, we won't know that backstory either because it hasn't been, there's that gap of missing passing it down the stories as well. That makes sense.
Hmm. And I think you can really, with AI, you can obviously, AI is not human. And you can tell, right, in the words
Yeah.
that AI will spit out is not human. And especially as we're telling stories related to culture, related to trauma, like that period of enslavement, like that story I just told about the master and his enslaved person. Like, it's so important that when we're sharing these stories and we're preserving these histories, that we're using language that is human, right? It is emotional, it is sensitive. And AI can't consider all of these facets, which are so important. Like language should never just be face value. It means so much more than just the letters that you've strung together to form a word or form a sentence. And AI will never capture that humanity because it is not
Yeah.
human. And for me, I think that's one of the biggest worries, even as it is an incredible tool. And can really speed things up, make things more efficient. Why are we so obsessed with efficiency, right? Again, it's like we want that convenience, but community is about inconvenience, right? And
Oh, I like
I don't
that.
think we should be so scared to be inconvenienced. I think we should take that on. I think we should be happy to be inconvenienced and welcome that change.
Okay, so give me three. And this is the golden rule of three in communications, I guess. But give me three reasons or three beautiful reasons of being inconvenienced, other than building a
Ooh.
community.
Hmm.
This is our befriend your
Okay,
mind moment.
the beauty of being inconvenienced. Number one, you lessen the load of your loved ones. And that is inherently a good thing because as a community, we are only as strong as all of our individual parts, right? There's no collective without the individual. There's no individual without the collective. If
Okay.
every individual doesn't feel strong and secure, we don't have a strong and secure community as a whole. And so you should always want to be lessening the load of your loved ones because it strengthens the community as a whole. So number one, inconvenience is beautiful because it lessens the load of your loved ones. Number two, it challenges you. I think if we aren't being inconvenienced, we aren't growing. We're staying in that comfort zone. We're constant. We're in a constant state of dropping the noise, ignoring the noise, blocking out the noise, and staying in this comfort zone with what is familiar. But there's another quote I read. I'm going to find it, and you're going to put it in the description because it's a really good quote. It's a really good quote about familiarity, unfamiliarity, and comfort. But yeah, inconvenience invites growth. And I think if we aren't growing, what is the point? If we aren't uncomfortable to a point, what is the point? So
Yeah.
that's also another beauty of inconvenience.
The
And the
third
third
one.
beauty, I think in a lot of ways, it brings you back to yourself to be inconvenienced. When
Oh,
you're inconvenienced, you're kind of placed in this limbo, this gray area. There's so many different directions you could take. There are so many solutions that you could pursue, and you're forced to inquire with yourself, oh, which one do I want to take? Which one is in alignment with my values? Which ones is in alignment with my truth, with what I want for myself, with what I want for my community? Which is the best option here? You're forced to kind of weigh up pros and cons, although it's not as simple as that, but you're forced to weigh up pros and cons. You're forced to weigh up every option before you and to question who you
mm,
really are, what your priorities are. And so it calls you back into yourself. It's about a coming back home to, right? About looking internally and then deciding how you want to act externally in order to reflect that internal reality outwardly. Those are my beauties.
I love that. I love all three of them. And the last one, right away, that pops in my head is in your inconvenience is where the grounding exists.
Hmm.
Because that's when you have to ground yourself again to be able to see that what you were saying, embrace the noise and drop the
Hmm.
noise, merge as one. Because you're dropping the
Hmm.
noise from inside while looking at all the noise outside. And then
Hmm.
you need that inconveniencing for it to happen. So yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, I love all three
Yeah.
of these.
Yeah. Like if we're never called into question ourselves, then how do we ever go through that process of regrounding? And not even regrounding, how do we go through the process of grounding, discovering who we are, placing our roots in the ground when we're never forced to call into question who we really are, what is really important to us? I think we need inconvenience. We need to be questioned. We need to be invited to come back into ourselves in order to grow those roots and in order to be able to embrace the outward noise because we're so secure and safe and confident in ourselves and where we are.
So Eden, you know what popped in my head was, do you think AI is an inconvenience for us because it's nudging us to come back to ourselves?
I don't think AI encourages us to come back to ourselves. I think it encourages us to take shortcuts,
Mm-hmm.
to, in a way, think less,
Mm-hmm.
to put less effort into the things that we do. And I've always been someone, this is going to seem like unrelated, but growing up, every hobby that I have, the instruments that I play, the interests that I have, um, these are all skills that I have grown myself through time and through labor, right? And I am incredibly proud of the skills I have today and the hobbies I have, the instruments I can play, everything, because I have worked so hard. I actually have a real issue when people call me talented because not 1 ounce of anything I have is talent because I've worked for it. I'm no prodigy. I've worked for it. And that is really important to me that gets recognized. And so I hate the word talent. And so that's why with AI, it concerns me that it's encouraging us to take shortcuts. I see how, of course, we need efficiency in certain situations, but even, the word efficiency really bothers me because there's something inherently non-human about it to me. I don't
Mm.
think we were made to constantly be seeking progress and advancement and the next big thing and do it faster, do it better, do it quicker. Like it's not about that end destination, the end goal, getting to the solution faster. It's always been about the journey. And AI completely removes that journey, removes that sense of pride in the journey. It feels so much, you kind of do that math problem when you're like in your teens and you finally get to the right answer. The reason that feels good isn't because you got the right answer. It's because of all the working out you did to get there and all the wrong twists
Yeah.
and turns you took. And AI completely removes that, that it cuts out that middleman. Um, it prioritizes efficiency and it just gets you that answer. But in doing that, we're losing all the skills of understanding how to take that journey, how to take the wrong twists and turns, evaluate the situation we end up in and decide, oh, so this isn't where I'm meant to be. How can I turn around the situation so I'm headed back in the right direction? I just think it completely removes that critical thinking
Mm-hmm.
and completely removes our capacity, or it's minimizing our capacity to deal with discomfort
I
and to
think
deal with
resilience as
the
well.
unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's making us
Less
less
resilient.
resilient,
Yeah.
more opposed to challenge, more opposed to inconvenience. So I don't think that even though AI is about,
Well,
um,
what I was thinking about it as an inconvenience is that
mm,
because I agree 100%. I wish I could argue with you what you're saying, but you're in line with my thinking on this. But the reason I think AI is an inconvenience is because it's making so many people look deeper inside. The people I've met have to look deeper inside themselves because AI can make you doubt yourself if you use it because it can get that dependent. And if you go through what you're saying, you want to leverage your discomfort, almost those three beautiful points that you shared, that the reason we need to be inconvenienced, people who are not scared of being inconvenienced, they will recognize AI as an inconvenience to their creativity. So it might spur them even more if they take action.
yes.
Um, but when you were just sharing also, I can see the other side of it, which is people will just get into that whole efficiency mindset and not go down
Yeah.
seeing it as a inconvenience, but see it as a convenience. And I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah. Oh, one question I wanted to ask you, like, if a lot of the generations that are coming, your generation is more AI, um, prone, or are they moving more towards human storytelling? Telling, like sitting around the campfire.
Such an interesting question. I think it's a mixed bag. I think as much as we try to embrace all of the noise, we inherently end up in kind of echo chambers because
Yeah.
we tend to be around like-minded people. So I'd say most of the people that I am around and I surround myself with, they'll use AI. I use AI sometimes, of course, like for work-related things, it really does just speed things up sometimes. But I always lead with that caution, and the people that I'm around always lead with that caution. But you see, especially on TikTok, I think TikTok and the conversation around AI is super interesting. The way that people are going to AI for mental health support, and often the first thing people will think when a problem is presented to them is, "Oh, let me ask ChatGPT. Let me not even start to think how I could answer that question myself." People are asking ChatGPT, "What should I have for dinner?" or "What should I do tomorrow?" or "The weather's nice." Like people are asking the most basic questions that you could absolutely just ask yourself and then come up with an answer yourself, like internally. So I see people that are my age, maybe even more people that are on my kind of side of things, who are just throwing themselves headfirst into AI, not thinking about the negative impact it's having on us as humans, on our critical thinking, on the environment, which is a whole conversation as well, the way that it's impacting the environment.
And you remind me of this, and now we're sitting into quotes today, but Elon Musk, there was a quote about Elon Musk and Keanu Reeves. And Elon Musk is all about, AI and it's so great and this and that and the other. And Keanu Reeves just was like, yeah, but but what is it like? Will an AI ever feel human, basically? And it's
Hmm.
true. For me, every artwork, when it's done, it's come out of that place of humanity and soulfulness. And I'm like, AI will not have that. As long as there's no beating heart in
Yeah.
there, I don't see it.
But I think the terrifying thing is that because AI is convenient, people are now turning to AI for mental health support. And that's something
Yes.
I'm thinking about more and more because of the work that I do in well-being and community well-being with
Yeah.
EC communities now with
Yeah.
EVR. But it's terrifying, right? People are going out of their way to avoid talking with their real, their human community because, oh, it's just easier, it's more convenient to hop onto ChatGPT and ask what to do when I'm feeling depressed, or just not even that. People aren't asking questions. They're ranting about their relationship situations, their breakups, their struggles right now, and then just having ChatGPT affirm them. So sometimes it's not even about solutions, it's about craving that human connection, but being too afraid to reach out to real humans for that. And so defaulting to typing in your phone because here we are in this age of social media and technology. And it's
But
terrifying.
but what then I did speak about this as well because it's now become within 1 year, the Harvard Business Review showed that within 1 year, the reason people are using it for therapy was changed from generating ideas into therapy. And I thought, oh,
Wow.
that is really scary that it happened within 1 year. But then also because culturally, let's say in our cultures, there's the aspect of shame is still there, the guilt is still there. It is such a perfect tool for the
Mm,
people who cannot go through the shame and guilt because you're hiding behind the
mm,
screen. And there's also conformity bias. Like when you put into ChatGPT, it will be like, oh, you're on the right path, da da da. And you're just like, but no, it's not giving the hard
yeah.
truth that you would actually get from a therapist, I
Hmm.
would say.
Hmm.
So you working in well-being is what are how are they going to tackle that? Is there anything coming out or conversations around this?
I think it's still relatively new, so we're kind of just gonna have to see. But I think one thing that I've kind of learned through my work with EVR is that this is why we need culturally competent, qualified mental health services, right? This is why we work with East and Southeast Asian therapists to provide completely free therapies to community members
Oh
because we
wow,
don't
okay.
want people to be defaulting to AI and robots and machines, right? We want them to have that human connection. But you're right. It's really difficult because of the shame, the guilt, the culture of shame that exists when it comes to talking about struggle and quote unquote failure in our communities. And so that's why we are working, and they're hard to find, they're really hard to find, but that's why we're working with East and Southeast Asian qualified therapists to provide these services to other East and Southeast Asian community members. Because if you can walk into a room or hop onto a Zoom call and see a therapist that looks like you, and maybe the service isn't even called therapy, it's just called support, or it's called, a gathering, that eliminates those barriers. You're
Yeah.
suddenly not really thinking about guilt and shame because you're talking to someone who, quote unquote, looks like you, but doesn't carry those stigmas. And two, we're not even we're using language that is accessible to you, right? There's a reason that we switched our group therapy over to being called group support, because therapy is a terrifying word for a lot of
I thank
communities.
you. Yes.
Yeah, it's terrifying. We don't want to talk about therapists.
No, no.
We don't want to talk about needing therapy, needing help. And so, oh, you're not in therapy though. You're with a therapist, but you're just in a group support. You're just in a room doing some activities, talking with a group of people about how your week's been, maybe. Like therapy looks a lot of different ways, and we don't have to call it therapy for it to be therapy. But yeah, I think it is, I understand why people turn to AI to rant about mental health related issues, but we don't want that, which is why culturally competent services are really important. Gender specific, language specific, culture specific services are so important. And it's so important that they're free as well, right? Because it's another major barrier. If
Yeah.
our people are already so resistant to going to therapy or going to a support group, they're definitely not going to go if you have to pay money for it, right? So it's about eliminating those barriers so that people aren't resorting to
But
the
that's
convenience of AI.
but that's challenging, but yet looking for the holistic approach. But talking about how scary it is, I was scrolling on Instagram and I came across a conversation where AI is now coming into schools. And an 8-year-old girl went researching about something that could have been done in a therapy session or a conversation with her and her parents. And it ended up that ChatGPT said that she's incomplete. Yeah. And while
Incomplete.
everybody's incomplete. And it turned out that she was behaving really strange and off. And to me, it spoke volumes because it's a girl. Thinks she needs to be perfect. 8-year-old putting pressure on yourself. Worried that you're not good enough already. You go online. You're looking at it online. And then here you go. Bam, you're incomplete. And the dominant data, you see, it's like picking that one word and plugging it in makes all the difference on the
Mm,
behavior. And then people were like, yeah, but hopefully it'll be okay. And I'm just thinking, you're just grazing through this.
hmm.
But the well-being of a
Yeah.
child can get affected at such a young age. And who and how are you getting it monitored? And why is it being
Yeah.
used?
I think that's a really important aspect of this as well, is how young are these AI users? 8 years old. That is truly
Eight.
so scary. Think about how impressionable you are at that age. And for some of your first inputs into your appearance or how you should be, how like the person you should become, when your first inputs are robots, are AI, aren't even human, that is when you know there's an issue. Because
Yeah.
what direction is that guiding you in? And how are you being lured somewhere by values and suggestions and opinions that are not even human or not even emotional, not even specific and individual to your situation and the complexities of your identity? And to think that 8-year-olds are absorbing that kind of information, I think is terrifying. Like, I think in summary, it can be a really, really useful tool, but I think not enough people are scared by it. And I think we should be more scared and exercise more caution as we are using it, because it doesn't have to be inherently bad, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
inherently bad with wanting to make certain processes faster, but it's when it's taking over, it's when we're getting caught up in the wave of enthusiasm, right, that it becomes an issue, and when we're not exercising caution and critical thinking. So that's why I have worries. But of course, there's many ways in which it's completely changed and revolutionized a lot of processes, and that can't be discredited, even as we have all of these concerns. It's the same with anything. People have these concerns about the rise of social media and all kinds of technology. And so it's just exercise awareness, exercise caution with all of these things, of course, and center humanity is what I would always say when it comes to AI and issues of AI.
Okay, so we're now reaching towards the end of the podcast. And I wanted to ask you, we've covered storytelling in so many different ways, how its importance, how much our culture plays such a big role, and our words, right? To me, it's about getting to know it's about almost having that high sense of awareness with what you say and how you say it. What is that one strand of yours that has been guiding you all the way? If you had to leave me with something today, if you said, okay, this is the last sentence of the book, this is the last thing I want you to know, what would that be?
I think it would be something that I picked up very recently in a conversation with one of EVR's therapists, Anne. Anne, if you're listening, love you to bits. And she said, being over doing. I could get that tattooed, right? Being greater than sign doing. I think especially today, being someone who's younger, being someone who's always been incredibly hardworking and not talented at all, I've always been pushing ahead, right? Checking things off the to-do list that is growing longer and longer by the day. And I get very caught up in productivity and efficiency, right? In many ways, especially when I was growing up and before I became more wary of the concept. And more now, even while I'm still being and acting in ways that could be considered productive, right? I'm getting plenty done each day. All of this is in alignment with my being. And being comes first, just existing in the body that I exist in, being at the intersection of the identities that I intersect at, and understanding me, my values, what grounds me. That is what guides me through all the doing that I do. So it's being before doing, being overdoing.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it with that. Thank you, Eden.
Thank you.
Okay, so do you realize that assumption is no longer just a human thing? AI does it too. You see, generative AI bases its output solely on the data we give it, often missing those really nuanced little experiences. And so sitting with Eden, that was a realization for me. But also what I liked is that she spoke about the power of being inconvenienced, of stepping into discomfort or our differences. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. It only can work into our favor if we open up to each other's stories. So stories are really a powerful tool. It shares who we are, it shares what we stand for, how to understand us better, and helps us go deeper beyond the surface. And that's what breaks assumptions. And from what I gathered, living in assumptions can make the world a very lonely place. And stories can be the change maker. And for that to happen, we have to go into being, grounding ourselves and being within ourselves, and recognize our stories can be used for the greater good. And that's how we go from being over doing. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And do let me know, what was your big takeaway? Have a good one. Till the next one. Take care.